Republican Party didn't have a great 4 years, but they didn't have a great, or a poor 4 years either. So they reminded Americans that, you know, they were enjoying the highest standard of living in American history. The economy was good. People really weren't complaining. And so when this campaign came out, the Republicans said, hey, you're enjoying the highest standard of living we've had in American history. But the biggest asset that the Republicans had in this election was Eisenhower's popularity and his very popular grin. He had a really grandfather look about him. Very nice smile. He's not having this picture? Yeah. No, I mean, people looked at him and said, hey, this guy is a nice guy. Okay? Well, when the rubber hit the road on the election, it was a pretty bad butt kicking for Stevenson. Eisenhower beat him by over 10 million popular votes and just crushed him in the Electoral College. It was 457 to 73. It was a really wide margin. So Eisenhower, despite the fact that he was stand-pat-ish, so to speak, he defeated Stevenson badly, worse than the last election. The Electoral College was 557 to 73. I mean, that is a major whipping. And he put it on him. And you know, Adlai Stevenson, we're going to talk about him next, you know, a little bit more next semester. But he was a very nice guy. I mean, he was going to really be a good politician. He just couldn't win the presidency, okay? He gets beat 457 to 73. 457, sorry, to 73. All right, now, Eisenhower did face some serious disadvantages going into his second term. Here are 4 disadvantages, or 4 things that aren't going to be very positive for him as he enters his second term. The Democrats will control both houses of Congress. That is never a good thing when you're a Republican. Or if you're a Democrat, it's never good to have the Republicans controlling both houses of Congress. So that's one disadvantage that Eisenhower is going to have in his second term, is the Democrats are going to control both houses of Congress. The second disadvantage he had, and the Democrats tried to point it out in the election, is Eisenhower really was in fragile health. He wasn't in very good health when he started his second term. So the Democrats had a point there. Nobody cared, but they had a point. So he did begin his second term in fragile health. Well, the third disadvantage is probably the best cabinet member he had, John Foster Dulles, which we talked about earlier, got cancer. And he died in 1959. So he lost probably the best cabinet member he had to cancer in 1959. So that was a serious disadvantage. When Eisenhower's Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, became very ill with cancer and eventually died in 1959. He wasn't a lot of good to Eisenhower during that second term because of his illness, and then he eventually died in 1959. And the fourth disadvantage is one of his assistants, a guy by the name of Sherman Adams, had to resign under a dark cloud of scandal. So he had some disadvantages. He had to work with the Democratic Congress. His health was not that great. His best ally in the cabinet, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, was sick most of the second term and died in the second term. And one of his assistants, presidential assistant Sherman Adams, resigned under a dark cloud of scandal. So it was kind of funny. The new Secretary of State, Christian Herter, that took over for Dulles, when he was asked about, what do you think Eisenhower last years as president, if you could sum up his last years of the second term as president, how would you do that? And he said, in his last years as president, I did less golfing and more governing. So he had to take more of an active role in that second term because of these disadvantages. So when, again, Secretary of State Christian Herter, who replaced John Foster Dulles, was asked, how do you think President Eisenhower is doing in the latter part of his second term? He said, quote, in his last years as president, I did less golfing and more governing. Okay? All right, well, that'll take us then to the race with Russia into space. This is a pretty neat topic, and we kind of start the race for space, and it really will be more, it'll be more determined and more handled during the Kennedy presidency, but it starts here with Eisenhower. The race with Russia into space. Okay, on October 4th of 1957, October 4th of 1957, Russian scientists shocked the world when they lifted the first satellite into orbit. On October 4th, 1957, Russian scientists shocked the world as they lifted the first satellite into orbit. And this satellite that they lifted into orbit weighed 184 pounds, and it was known as Sputnik 1. So on October 4th, 1957, Russian scientists shocked the world as they lifted the first satellite into orbit. It weighed 184 pounds, and they named it Sputnik 1. A month later, Sputnik 2 was launched. It weighed 1,120 pounds and carried a dog into space. So 1 month later, in November of 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik 2. It weighed 1,120 pounds and it actually carried a dog into space. Now the point of this is this new Russian space experience really shattered American self-confidence. And many Americans believe that the United States now were taking a back seat to not only Russia but communism as far as scientific achievement went. And you got to think about this. The Americans were horrified. If they could shoot 184-pound satellites and then 1,120-pound satellites into space, they certainly could send intercontinental ballistic missiles to the United States. So the Red Scare began with the launching of Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2. Americans were horrified. You know, the worst thought possible raced through their minds. If the Russians could fire heavy objects into space, they certainly could reach the United States with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Yeah. Not much, it just went into space, really. But I'll tell you more about Sputnik 2, because there's a story behind that, but it's later. Okay? Yeah. And we're going to get into that too. Very good. Yes, that's exactly right. We're going to talk about that. Matter of fact, we're right here. So, what we had in the United States was what they called in history rocket fever. Okay? Many Americans believe that students in the United States, as Hannah just stated, were far behind the learning curve of the Soviet Union in the area not only of science, but what else? It kind of goes with it, mathematics. So Americans were shocked at the Sputnik successes. And they believed that students in the United States were getting behind our enemies, the Russians, in the area of math and science. Well, we had to respond to this. The United States is going to respond to Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2 in two ways. Now, the first way is we're going to launch our own satellite into space. And we do that on February 1st of 1958. So on February 1st, 1958, the United States responds to Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2 and regain a little prestige by launching our own satellite into space at a wimpy 30.8 pounds. But hey, we got something into space, okay? Now, not satisfied with that performance, as Hannah said very intelligently, late in 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act. Late in 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act. And it gave $887 million in loans to needy college students. Late in 1958, the National Defense Education Act was passed that authorized $887 million to go out as possible loan money to needy college students that didn't have money to go, but they could borrow the money at a low interest rate. And that happened in 1958 with the National Defense Education Act. I actually reaped some of the benefits of that money when I went to college in the 1980s because it was still in place. Now, to get back to what Hannah said, of that $887 million for needy college students, they earmarked grants for those that would go into the field of science, math, and what's the difference between a loan and a grant? You don't have to pay the grant back. Okay? BEOG grant, Basic Education Opportunity Grant, was real big when I went to school in the 1980s. And that was a product of the National Defense Education Act and was part of the grant program. Now, they had expanded it by the 80s to cover all students. But in 1958, the National Defense Education Act was passed. It put $887 million in a pot for loans for students to go to school. But if you would go into science and math, they would make that loan a grant in which you had to qualify for, but you did not have to pay back. Okay, very good, Hannah.
What was it called?
The National Defense Education. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. In my day, it was called the BEOG grant. And that was a grant that, you didn't have to pay back. I just was kind of saying that. Okay, we'll get back to the race for space as we move on towards the 50s and into the 60s. But we're going to go to 1957 at a glance. And I gave you some handouts, didn't I? Some color handouts with some things on them. Pull those up. I didn't? Oh, I'm sure I did, didn't I? You didn't? Oh, I saved them. Here we go. Oh, yeah. Here we go. I gave you my shoe. These are awesome. I went all out with the color. Hey, it's a lot of paper, but you're worth it. All right, now, we'll kind of refer to these at times, okay? 1957 at a glance. We're going to start with January. I'm going to tell you something that happened on January 5th. I'm going to give you kind of a long story because it's important you know this. I would have it. January 5th, 1957. We're going to tell you kind of a long story here. On January 5th of 1957, professional baseball player Jackie Robinson announced he would retire from professional baseball. On January 5th, 1967, professional baseball player Jackie Robinson announced he will retire from professional baseball. Now, we're going to tell you a lot about Jackie Robinson. This is almost like a profile on him. He's a very important person in American history when it comes to breaking the color barrier. And Jackie Robinson was the guy that broke the color barrier. He became the first black athlete to play Major League Baseball in the 20th century. He's the first one ever to play Major League Baseball. I'll tell you a little bit about the guy because I think it's important you understand who he is. Jackie Robinson first signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. That's when he signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers. He had a very successful baseball career. He was named Rookie of the Year that first year in 1947. 2 years later, he was named Most Valuable Player of the National League, which is a very prestigious honor. And in 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series and became world champions. So he signed with the Dodgers in 1947. That same year, his first season, he was National League Rookie of the Year. 2 years later, in 1949, he was the most valuable player for the National League. And in 1955, he led the Brooklyn Dodgers to a World Series championship. And throughout his 10-year career as a Major League Baseball player, he not only was a very talented player, but he also served as a very vocal civil rights activist. Okay, very, very important man in our history. I'll tell you a little bit about Jackie Robinson. He was born in 1919 in Georgia, and he was the youngest of 5 children. So Jackie Robinson was born in 1919 in Georgia, the youngest of 5 children. Now, have you ever heard of Jesse Owens? Jesse Owens was a famous gold medalist in the 1936 Olympics, in which who was controlling Germany at the time? Hitler, and was very upset that a black man would be showcasing his talents and beating out his own Germans in races. Very famous. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Jackie Robinson's athletic ability within his family. His older brother, Matthew, won the silver medal in the 200-meter dash at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, losing to Jesse Owens. So they were a very athletic family. So Jackie Robinson's older brother Matthew actually won the silver medal in the 200-meter dash in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin with Hitler watching, as two African Americans went 1-2 in the 200 meters, which just irritated him to no end. Well, after Jackie went through elementary and high school, Jackie Robinson, he attended junior college and then went to UCLA, where he became the university's first student athlete to win varsity letters in 4 different sports. This guy was an athlete, okay? So Jackie goes through elementary and high school, he goes to junior college, then he graduates from junior college and continues his education at UCLA, and he becomes the university's first student athlete to win varsity letters in 4 different sports: football, baseball, track, and basketball. He won varsity letters in all 4. That's something at a major university at the time. So he attends junior college, he continues his education at UCLA, and he becomes the university's first student athlete to win varsity letters in 4 different sports: football, basketball, track, and baseball. Okay, he did not graduate from UCLA. He left just shy of graduation because he had financial hardship. He could not afford. So he went to Hawaii, moved to Hawaii, where he played semi-pro football for a period of time. So Jackie Robinson was forced to leave UCLA just shy of graduation due to financial hardship. He got himself somehow to Hawaii, where he played semi-pro football. For those kids that don't know what that is, you're not good enough to play in the NFL, but they have all kinds of semi-pro leagues where they actually pay you to play at a lower level. Well, what did he do after Pearl Harbor? Joined the Army. Yep, he joined the United States Army after Pearl Harbor. Now, this is kind of interesting. He went to boot camp at Fort Hood, Texas. Anybody else going to do that? You going to go to Fort Hood? Or do you know where you're going? Okay. Well, he was arrested while he was at boot camp at Fort Hood, Texas. And he was court-martialed as well. You know why? He refused to give up his seat and move to the back of a segregated bus. And because he refused to get up and move to the back of a segregated bus and give his seat up to a white person, they arrested him, and because of his arrest, he was court-martialed from the United States Army. Well, that didn't go over real well, so his friends got together with the help of the NAACP, and they shed some public light on the injustice that he was given, and they acquitted him of the charges, and he then received an honorable discharge from the military. So people didn't think that was right.
Jackie Robinson.
What's that?
The sit.
Well, kind of, yeah. Kind of, but it was just... Okay? Now, after he was discharged from the Army in 1944, he began to play baseball professionally. Okay? Now, the time that he went to play baseball professionally, baseball was segregated. They had the Negro Leagues. And so he was playing in the Negro League. And nobody wanted to touch that situation because there were some talented Negro players, but nobody was willing to take a risk or take the criticism to bring anybody from the Negro Leagues up into Major League Baseball, except the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Branch Rickey. He developed a tremendous amount of spine, backbone, and courage. And in 1957, we already talked about that, he signed Jackie Robinson to help integrate Major League Baseball. Now, if you know anything about baseball, you got to go to the minors first. So when did he come to the majors? When did he win Rookie of the Year? I misled you a little bit on the date. 1947. So he actually first signed in 1946. And he went to the Montreal Royals, which was a farm team for the Dodgers. So he didn't come right to the major leagues. Most people don't do that. So when Branch Rickey signed him to help integrate Major League Baseball, he joined the Montreal Royals, which was a farm team for the Dodgers in 1946. Well, Branch Rickey knew that it would be difficult times for Robinson, even in the major leagues. So he sat down and he made Jackie Robinson promise not to fight back when he would be confronted with racism, because he knew he was going to get it. He's the first and only black player in the major leagues at this time, even though he's actually in the minor leagues at a farm team. Well, Jackie Robinson listened to him and promised Branch Rickey that he would not fight back if he was confronted with racism. Well, during that minor league season, he had a 340, you can write whatever you want on this, he had a 349 batting average and a 985 fielding average, which means 98.5% of the time he did everything correctly, didn't make many errors. And a 349 batting average is very good. And because of those good statistics, what did they do in 1947? Moved him up to the major league team, the Dodgers, and he debuted on April 15, 1947. That was when he debuted. His first major league baseball game for the Dodgers was on April 15, 1947. And with that date and that happening, he becomes the first black athlete ever to play in Major League Baseball, okay? Because he was in the minors prior to that. Well, he was harassed, came and gone for him, but he persevered. He took Branch Rickey's advice. He did not fight back physically. His first year in the major leagues, he hit 12 home runs, and the Dodgers won the National League pennant. And he went on to just have a tremendous major league career for 10 years. Give you some examples of things he did. Write down what you want. You probably won't ask these type of things. But during his career, he stole home 19 times. That's incredible. Stealing home is where it's not the ball's hit and you get home. The pitcher winds up, throws, and you beat the throw to the plate. He stole home 19 times in his career. Just an incredible feat. And he became the highest paid athlete in